David, thanks. Hi, everyone. I'm Linda Vester. Important breaking news this hour on DaySide. The 9/11 Commission hearings, they have become much more contentious. Some of the biggest fireworks are about to begin in about 30 minutes from now when a man named Richard Clarke testifies. Commissioners are already using his angry new book to grill high-level officials.
At this level, we wanted to go ahead with arming that predator. I mean, I haven't read the book, so I don't know what the context is.
Has anybody at CIA read the book?
Not yet, sir.
They're all talking about Richard Clarke's book. Former counterterrorism chief Richard Clarke is about to begin his testimony. He is expected to hammer the Bush administration. But Fox News has learned of something new about this man that may damage his credibility. It is a Fox News exclusive audio tape that you are about to hear. Senior White House correspondent Jim Engel is the one who has this tape. He is with us now from the White House, or from our Washington bureau. Jim, I understand that these are statements from Mr. Clarke himself while he was still working in the Bush administration?
That is correct. This is from August of 2002. Now, of course, Richard Clarke now says that the Bush administration did virtually nothing about the threat from al-Qaeda until it struck on September 11th. But back in August of 2002, he gave an entirely different account, praising President Bush for acting quickly and decisively to change the policies of the Clinton administration. Fox News has an audio tape of a session Clarke had with reporters back then in which he offers 7 points to demonstrate how much the Bush administration had done and how quickly it had moved to resolve issues left over from the previous administration.
Just a shift from the rollback strategy to the elimination strategy. When President Bush told us in March to stop swatting at flies and just solve this problem, that was the strategic direction that changed the NSPD from one of rollback to one of elimination.
Now, that's a National Security Presidential Directive is what an NSPD stands for. There is another bite we'll get to here in a moment in which Clarke said that one of the early decisions of the administration was also to vastly increase funding for covert action against al-Qaeda. Here's what he said. Oh, we don't have that shot. Clarke laid out the fact that the administration had approved a quintupling, 5 times as much funding for going after al-Qaeda as had been the case in the previous administration. 5 times as much money for covert action. Now, in addition to that, of course, there are all sorts of issues during that time, and there are plenty of criticisms of both administrations and plenty of agonizing as both administrations look back to figure out if there's anything they could have done. But Clarke says that while the Bush administration was working with Pakistan and Uzbekistan to deny sanctuaries to al-Qaeda, it also aggressively pursued Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda with covert actions. That this had been the policy under the Clinton administration. It was continued under the Bush administration even more aggressively, he said. Now, Clarke argued that over the 2 years after al-Qaeda attacked the 2 U.S. embassies in Africa, that the Clinton administration had not made decisions about a number of proposals that Clarke himself had put forward, including the need to have closer relations with Pakistan, which, of course, shares a border with Afghanistan and was backing the Taliban at that point. I asked Clarke back in August 2002 about criticisms that the Bush administration had done nothing about that until al-Qaeda attacked us. At the time, he vigorously defended the administration and disputed those charges.
Jim, it appears that we have a minor malfunction regarding the tape.
Okay, well,
we know it's a lot of tape, but do you mind if I just ask you a quick question?
Go ahead.
A lot of times when administration officials brief you reporters at the White House, it's off the record or it's on background. Are we kosher in releasing this audio tape?
It is usually on background. It is a fight we have with them almost every time this happens. What quite often happens is you'll go into a session, it's on background, attributable to a senior administration official. We then sometimes go back and say, well, how about this and how about that? Can't we put that on the record? And at our request, they often do that. I had a session with an official just this week, which was initially off the record, then on deep background, then we were able to get a couple of statements on background. It happens fairly often. In this case, the White House had no recollection of this session. We went back to them because I had the tape and asked that it be put on the record, and they agreed.
Got it. Chief White House correspondent Jim Engel. Jim, thank you very much. Now, we have Molly Hennenberg stationed in a skybox about the hearing where the 9/11 commissioners are meeting. She's basically above the room. And as you may have seen, they are getting increasingly testy in their questions. Molly, if you could, just give us the key things that have come out so far today.
Hi, Linda. National Security Advisor Sandy Berger, he was the National Security Advisor for the Clinton administration. He just finished his testimony, but he countered some criticism that the Clinton administration did not really go after bin Laden strongly enough. Berger said that President Clinton wanted to kill bin Laden in August '98 when he ordered missile strikes on terror sites in Sudan and Afghanistan. They missed bin Laden by hours, Berger said. Perhaps he was tipped off by the Pakistanis. But still, Berger said President Clinton wanted to kill the terror leader.
President Clinton pressed often for special forces options to get bin Laden, boots on the ground. The military seriously considered such missions. But before 9/11, with no regional support or bases, daunting operational obstacles, and no lead time intelligence on bin Laden's whereabouts, the military leadership concluded that any such mission likely would fail.
CIA Director George Tenet testified earlier, and he said the CIA was very focused on Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda. In fact, the CIA set up an office dedicated to Osama bin Laden in '96. And then in summer '01, when intelligence reports suggested an increasing al-Qaeda threat, Tenet said he took action.
I personally contacted a dozen of my foreign counterparts. This intense period, and thanks to our partners' work, led to arrests and detentions in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Turkey. It led to disruptions in 24 countries. We helped halt, disrupt, or uncover weapons caches and plans to attack U.S. diplomatic facilities in the Middle East and Europe. In a few minutes, I've described what thousands of people did over the course of years in this country and overseas. But despite these efforts, we still did not penetrate the plot that led to the murder of 3,000 men and women.
This afternoon, coming up next, we're going to hear from Richard Clarke, the former counterterrorism aide to both President Clinton and President Bush. He has just come out with a new book. Linda, I know you're going to talk about that on your show, that both administrations didn't heed his warnings about what a threat al-Qaeda was. The 9/11 Commission panel likely will have many questions for Richard Clarke. Linda?
Molly, thank you very much. We are expecting some fireworks when Mr. Clarke begins to testify. You will see that live here on Fox. In the meantime, Evan Coleman is an international terrorism consultant. Matthew Levitt is former FBI. He's now a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Matt, I'd like to start with you. Because you were at FBI in counterterrorism at the time, part of the time that Richard Clarke has been referring to in some of his accusations. What do you think of what he's saying? Agree or disagree?
Well, let me caveat it by saying that I was not directly working on the issues that he's talking about.
Okay.
But I think it's important to note that it's not like the government was sitting on its hands throughout this period. There's no question that a lot more could have been done, that there was a tremendous need for a lot more political will. I was involved in efforts that we attempted to do but didn't get the political go-ahead to do at different times. I think at the FBI, clearly there was a tremendous need for greater analysis, for more language skills. There was a lack of appreciation for the need to transform from a purely law enforcement agency to one that was really a serious domestic intelligence agency, and that's something that is just now really beginning to happen.
Let me focus really on Richard Clarke, because he's the one who seems to be getting a lot of people's attention. Evan, you have a lot of direct personal history with Richard Clarke. And some people you just heard our exclusive from Jim Engel at the White House with this briefing that Richard Clarke gave that appears to contradict some of what he's saying today. Give us your background on him and whether you think he's telling the truth or whether he maybe has an agenda.
Well, I know Dick Clarke, and I've known him since before 9/11, and I specifically chose him to recommend my book and read my book and read it specifically to check out if my facts corresponded with the facts on the ground, because I believe he was one of the first to come out and really be a whistleblower, to be someone both in the Clinton and Bush administration, to be a lone wolf and come out and say, look, we're being threatened by al-Qaeda. It's a real threat. We can't ignore it, and it will come back and haunt us if we don't. Now, there were many in both administrations who did not give him the credit he deserved. Now, does that mean that they should have known that 9/11 was going to happen? Look, hindsight is 20/20. And it's very easy for us to sit here in judgment and say, well, they should have known. The one thing is clear. They should have paid more attention to Dick Clarke. He's a patriot. He has his heart in the right place. And I think what he says today in the hearing needs to be taken very, very seriously. And people that are going to vote in the next election need to take his considerations as being very legitimate.
All right, Matt, I have a question for you based on what you have told our producers. You said that Dick Clarke did not care who he stepped on to get the job done, and he was not involved in as many meetings as he thought he was. Explain what you mean.
Dick Clarke wanted to get the job done, to his credit. And in an effort to do that, he was willing to bang some heads together and bend some rules. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you do it too often, it's kind of like crying wolf. People are going to stop paying attention to you.
But what about saying that he was involved in all these meetings, and you saying he wasn't involved in as many meetings as he says he was?
Well, what I told the producers was that what I've been told is that he was not involved in as many meetings as he says that he was after the Bush administration came in. I have not pretended to have been a party to those meetings or to have been a confidant of his at any time. But a lot of people are saying that there were meetings that happened about counterterrorism in which he was not involved. Now, should he have been involved? I think so. What's the point of having a counterterrorism specialist in the White House, whether he's a czar, he's a cabinet level official or not, and not bring him in on the meetings?
Quick final question to Evan. I still can't seem to understand why Richard Clarke is saying things like, when I mentioned al-Qaeda to Condi Rice, she didn't know what I was talking about. And then saying in this briefing with Jim Angle and other reporters, extolling the virtues of the Bush administration's efforts in the war on terrorism. I can't figure out why he would say such incredibly different things, Evan.
Well, to me anyway, and maybe this is just my opinion, but I think that the war in Iraq may have affected Richard Clarke's view of the Bush administration. And I think while he was long a proponent for fierce action against al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, I don't think he felt that Iraq was a key integral component of the overall war on terror. And I think he felt that Saddam Hussein was a sideshow and not part of what we should be doing in order to stop the threats to our direct homeland security.
So are you saying that he soured on the Bush administration because they did something he disagreed with in Iraq?
Well, this is just my impression. My impression is that Richard Clarke would have preferred the Bush administration to go ahead in Afghanistan and take care of the job there, get rid of bin Laden, even if it didn't mean get rid of al-Qaeda completely, rather than wasting resources in Iraq. Now, you can debate the efficacy of getting rid of Saddam Hussein towards the overall war on terror. Richard Clarke clearly did not believe it was an integral component.
All right, got to leave it there. Evan and Matt, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Coming up on DaySide, Richard Clarke's blistering accusations against the Bush administration's handling of the war on terror. As we mentioned, he's about to appear before the 9/11 Commission in the next several minutes. DaySide will bring that to you live the moment he walks into the hearing room. Plus, a woman pastor has been called in to meet several times with Michael Jackson. Now she is talking to DaySide in just a moment.
Even at 110 degrees, Delphi's thermal systems help keep this Maserati cool in the cockpit and under the hood. And now that same technology is being served up in a completely different high-tech environment.
Credit card bills piling up?
Yep.
Need cash fast, huh?
Yep.
Try our e-loan home equity line to pay off those high-interest credit cards fast. In just 90 seconds, you could get approved to get the cash you need, and you'll have your money as quick as 12 days.
Hey, I'm approved already.
Needless paperwork? Gone. We'll even come to you for signing.
I like that.
Nothing should come between you and a great rate. That's why there's e-loan. Apply now at eloan.com or call 1-800-ELOAN-35.
Delphi's stability control systems help vehicles maneuver through sudden turns and punishing conditions. And now that same technology is helping us steer in another rewarding direction.
Oh, that's cool.
Tonight, healthcare, homeland
Homeland Security, the upcoming election, Nancy Pelosi weighs in, plus an economic update with Jon Snow at 4 on a special edition of Your World from D.C. Then, Canada's political turmoil from Homeland Security to hockey. Find out how the political battle up there could affect us down here at 5 on The Big Story. Plus, more explosive allegations against Bush's administration as Richard Clarke takes the stand. The latest at 6 on Special Report. It's on the #1 name in cable news, Fox News Channel.
Terror threats across the Middle East. Hello, everyone. I'm Kiran Chetri. The State Department shuts down 3 embassies after receiving these threats. The buildings in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Mauritius have been temporarily closed. Yesterday, the State Department issued a worldwide advisory warning American citizens overseas of growing threats from terrorist groups like Hamas and al-Qaeda. All of that coming after Israel's assassination of Hamas founder Ahmed Yassin. Meantime, Israel, already on high alert, caught a 16-year-old Palestinian teenager trying to enter the country with a suicide bomb belt. Neighbors identified him as a member of the PFLP, a Palestinian terror group. A small bomb is found on a state-run rail track in France. The Interior Ministry says the device, as well as detonators, were half buried on the main line between Paris and a Swiss city. It was discovered by a rail worker. Bomb experts have defused that explosive. So far, no one's claimed responsibility. Basketball star Kobe Bryant and his accuser will meet face-to-face for the first time since their encounter last summer. They're both in a Colorado courtroom today. The woman is to testify about her sex life, and then the judge will determine if those details can be introduced as evidence at Kobe's rape trial. The nation's highest court is considering whether to remove the words "under God" from the Pledge of Allegiance. The court is hearing arguments from a California atheist who objects to the pledge in his daughter's classroom. Opponents and supporters of the pledge gathered outside of the Supreme Court. The justices will determine if the words in the pledge violate the line between church and state. Nearly 9 out of 10 Americans polled recently say they want to keep the pledge as is. And those are your latest headlines. I'm Kiran Chetri.
Reports that the prosecutor in Michael Jackson's child molestation case plans to present at least 2 weeks of testimony to a secret grand jury, and that he may be calling on the young man who accused Jackson of molestation back in 1993. Now, on another matter, after Michael Jackson was charged with child molestation this time around, late last year, his inner circle called my next guest to his home for counseling, Pastor Paula White. She is the author of a book called Deal With It. You cannot conquer what you will not confront. Welcome, Pastor.
Linda, it's so good to be with you.
There are confidences that you can't reveal about things that were said between you and Michael Jackson. But in general, why were you called in?
You know, the first time I went to the Neverlands was for Joe Jackson's birthday, but then I was called at a later time to minister to Michael, the person, not the persona, not the personality, but to minister words of hope and words of encouragement.
I'm going to get straight to the point, and forgive me for being so personal, but you are a survivor yourself of childhood sexual abuse. So you know what it's like to
Yes, I am.
You know what it's like to be a victim.
Yes.
Do you believe that Michael Jackson is guilty of doing this to a child?
You know, as a minister, I'm there to minister to the person. We have a great system, a judicial system, that will weigh out all the facts and find what their verdict is. But I am there to offer words of hope and encouragement. In fact, I've written a book recently called Deal With It.
All right, I understand. And we mentioned the book. But let me put it this way. If Michael Jackson says something to you in your counseling sessions that in any way raises your suspicions that he might be guilty of harming an innocent child, are you going to go to police?
You know, I'm there to minister to a person, of hope and encouragement. And again, Linda, there's great words of wisdom and advice, and there's ministerial ethics and confidentiality as I'm ministering to a person. And whether it's Michael Jackson or whether I'm dealing with someone else that's in a very precarious
for the sake
situation.
for the sake of a child, though, if there was anything that came out in your counseling sessions that made you think that, yes, indeed, a child had been harmed, wouldn't you go to the police?
Well, Linda, you're using the word counseling, but I'm using the word that I was there to offer hope and encouragement for a person, which is completely different.
All right.
And this isn't the first time that I've ministered to someone, and there's wisdom and there's accountability, and so again, my purpose was to minister to the person.
Pastor Paula White, we thank you very much. Coming up next, the politics of terror. A lot of finger-pointing is going on over these 9/11 Commission hearings, and voters are wondering if it's time to coincide with the presidential campaign. That's next on DaySide.
That's me with his whole family. You on a farm. Imagine with my allergies. You wanna go where you wanna go.
Singulair, the only seasonal allergy medicine that specifically blocks leukotrienes, an underlying cause of allergy symptoms. It's a once-a-day tablet that helps relieve a broad range of symptoms. Side effects are generally mild and vary by age and may include headache, ear infection, sore throat, and upper respiratory infection. Ask your doctor about Singulair. Singulair, a different way to treat seasonal allergies.
Real estate is red hot. Interest rates remain at an all-time low. First-time buyers, buyers moving up, or purchasing a second home. Everyone wants the best deal on a home loan. You owe it to yourself to call Ditech.com. Ditech.com is a direct lender, no middleman or broker fees. You can be pre-qualified online or over the telephone. There's still time to get a better deal, even if you've applied somewhere else. Ditech.com. Call 1-800-71-FIXED.
You don't hear this phone ringing? Hello?
Hi, Mom.
Oh, where are you? You haven't called this house in 2 days. I'm so worried.
Rose, who is it?
Vegas.
I got married. Yeah, I got married, Mom. I eloped.
But what in the world would make you do something like this?
$139 a week for any compact car at Budget. For irresistible prices on irresistible cars, call 1-800-BUDGET-7 or visit budget.com.
The meeting was going along great. Then they asked for our website address.
We lost the client because we didn't have a website.
We're a small business. We don't have IT guys.
Introducing website solutions from Register.com. You can build your professional website and host it for as little as $4.95 a month. No IT guys, no more losing customers because you don't have a website.
Within minutes, we had a professional website.
Register.com. Website solutions start at under $5 a month.
You're having a problem. It's okay. Impotency affects millions of men. If achieving or maintaining sexual performance is affecting you, Boston Medical Group can help. They specialize in men's sexual health. One call, one visit, and Boston Medical Group's board-certified doctors will take you from impotency to intimacy immediately. You'll think it's a miracle. It's medicine. Call Boston Medical Group today and feel like yourself again tonight. Guaranteed. 1-800-337-7555.
New fridge?
Glacier 2000.
Nice.
New TV?
60-inch plasma.
Very nice.
What do you got there, Frank?
A toaster? Comcast high-speed internet. Hooked it up myself.
For real?
Who wouldn't be impressed by the power of 100% pure broadband?
Can we come over?
Comcast high-speed internet.
Visit these retailers for a great offer.
I don't know anything about it. I've ordered the book. It's coming today. I'm going to read the book. Michael, I can't tell you. I haven't seen it. I want to read the book. I'm going to read it.
That's presidential candidate John Kerry talking about this new book by former anti-terror chief Richard Clarke. Clarke is expected to make sparks fly in a matter of just a few minutes when he testifies before the 9/11 Commission. You will see that live here on DaySide. By the way, a new poll is just out from the Associated Press. The question, who do you trust to do a better job of protecting the country? 58% of respondents said George W. Bush. 35% said John Kerry. But back to the 9/11 hearings, growing more and more contentious, and voters are wondering how much of this is playing politics. Ellen Ratner is a Fox News political analyst and radio talk show host. Richard Lowry is also a Fox News analyst and editor of the National Review. Welcome. Ellen and Rich, I'd like to set this up with a couple of statements from Richard Clarke. Okay, this is from his interview with another reporter. just 2 days ago. When the Bush administration came into office, they were told that al-Qaeda needed to be their #1 national security issue, and they didn't make it their #1 national security issue. Okay, next one. Richard Clarke's resignation letter to President Bush. It has been an enormous privilege to serve you these last 24 months. I will always remember the courage, determination, calm, and leadership you demonstrated on September 11th. And then Condoleezza Rice's answer to what Dick Clarke was accusing the Bush administration in terms of failing in the war on terror. Let's roll that tape of her response.
You know, I really don't know what Dick Clarke is doing. I do know this. Dick Clarke had plenty of opportunities to tell me that he thought we were going awry in the war on terrorism. But instead, when he came to me to ask for my support with Tom Ridge for the job that he wanted as the Deputy Secretary for Homeland Security, he told me he supported the president. So I don't really know quite what he's doing.
And so do a lot of Americans not know. What's going on, Rich?
Well, I think Dick Clarke's story is falling apart before our eyes, Linda. I think the most damning report was from Jim Angle this morning, who unearthed this tape of a briefing that Dick Clarke gave to reporters in 2002, where he praised Bush's record on terror and said how much the Bush administration had done to concentrate on this threat in the spring of 2001, including increasing 5-fold funding for CIA efforts to kill bin Laden. So obviously Clarke changed his mind, or for some reason has totally changed his tune, but this just doesn't add up.
Ellen, what do you say?
I don't think that it doesn't mean that he has changed his tune in any way, shape, or form. What it means is that on January 25th, after the administration came into office, or right around January 25th, he focused on al-Qaeda. Apparently, the Bush administration did not want to focus on al-Qaeda. And just because he gives a letter saying you had great leadership on September 11th doesn't mean that he doesn't have legitimate criticism that the administration did not focus on al-Qaeda.
I mean, if he had well, you're getting a mix, Ellen. You're not here to see it, but you're getting a mix. But if he had real grave concerns, as he says today, then wouldn't he write a more tempered letter, like I respect you for your leadership, and leave it there? I mean, does he have to be so glowing in his praise?
No, he was very specific, and he said that he respected what he did on September 11th. He doesn't talk about the earlier part or September 12th, and he actually, the president spoke to him on September 12th.
Rich?
That's a very decent resignation letter, but it doesn't mean a whole heck of a lot.
No, but he actually said in the same letter that he said that you were prescient in creating the cybersecurity part. I mean, prescient is he basically is painting the president now as a Dumbo.
But no, he's not.
And to say in his resignation letter that he was prescient is quite a different thing.
Let me jump in here, and I don't want to throw you off, but I do agree with Ellen on the resignation letter. I mean, it's basically a polite letter. I don't think that tells us much.
Really?
What is more telling is that in 2002, he was briefing reporters on how Bush had done much more than Clinton to address this threat early on. I mean, how does he wiggle out of that? And I think that's very hard.
Rich, his book talks about going after both Clinton and Bush about not doing enough.
No.
Sure does.
No, Ellen, the book gives Clinton a complete pass and is aimed like a cruise missile at the Bush administration. There's obviously some agenda here. I don't know what exactly it is, but it does not make sense to say Clinton decided not to retaliate for the coal, even though I, Dick Clarke, advocated for that. But he did a tremendous job. And George Bush, who took my idea of retaliating against those camps and said, no, let's make an even more aggressive strategy, and to say Bush was too weak makes no sense whatsoever.
Ellen, let me just ask you. Let me just quickly jump in, Ellen. But in terms of what Jim Angle has gotten in this Fox News exclusive, this audio tape of Richard Clarke talking about how the Bush administration expanded the funding for the certain aspects of the war on terror 5-fold, and he was very laudatory in what he said on audio tape. How do you square that?
Wait a minute. I think what you will hear this afternoon is a very balanced Clarke. I think there are some areas that he absolutely thinks the Bush administration fell down, and there's some areas that he supports. I don't know why this has to be all or nothing.
Well, Ellen, it's not a balanced book. It's a book that is meant to be a harsh criticism of the Bush administration, and it is. I mean, that's exactly what it is. He says that Bush did virtually nothing about this threat prior to 9/11, but in 2002 he told various reporters the things that Bush did do,
it's
and
interesting.
praised him for being so forward-looking on this.
Everybody's attacking Clarke's character and motives.
I'm not attacking his character or his motives.
Well, the Bush administration certainly is, and the question is has he really presented something balanced? I think he has. He supports them on cyber terrorism. He supports the Bush administration on that. He supported them in the tape on putting more money in. It doesn't mean that they didn't ignore some of the threats from Al-Qaeda.
Well, he's totally contradicted himself, Ellen.
All right. Well, all right. So we're going to get into some more details of this. Ellen and Rich, if you would, just hang on for 1 second. Coming up next, the latest headlines from Fox Central. And then the 9/11 Commission hearings are going on in Washington, as we're mentioning, getting more and more heated. In just a few moments, Richard Clarke, the former head of counterterrorism, is going to begin testifying. People expect sparks to fly. Stand by to see it live right here on DaySide.
Attention Medicare recipients. Are your breathing troubles holding you back? Enjoy the freedom of a small compact nebulizer or Med4Home's competitively priced inhalers. To talk about your breathing solutions, call Med4Home at 1-800-897-8862. We'll deliver breathing medications, inhalers, and portable nebulizers right to your door.
Med4Home will even file the Medicare paperwork for you, so call now to speak to a pharmacy consultant. We're standing by to talk to you.
Clock service, you'll feel really good riding with Geico. 15 minutes could save you 15% or more on car insurance.
At the Alamo. When I return, we'll get a home of our own, I promise. To protect what they love and fight for what they believe, a few hundred will stand against an empire. We're gonna need a lot more men. Touchstone Pictures presents the true story of the ordinary men who became heroes. Remember the Alamo! The Alamo, rated PG-13, starts April 9th in theaters everywhere.
Mr. Shatner, please have a seat. We have to let you go.
But I'm the voice of Priceline.
But now it's the new Priceline.
What's new about it?
You can actually choose your flights, times, even airlines from a selection of very low fares.
Or you can still name your own price and save even more.
But who could possibly replace me?
Hi, guys. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Leonard. The new Priceline. Now there's a choice.
Tonight at 8, her daughter and grandson brutally murdered. Now she's demanding justice and taking her fight to the Hill. Lacey Peterson's mother speaks out on a Factor exclusive. Then at 9, her sex life exposed when Kobe faces his accuser. How will the details of her past affect his future on Hannity and Combs? Plus at 10, how did a bitter custody battle involving the Pledge of Allegiance land her in the Supreme Court? The child's mother goes on the record. It's on the most powerful name in cable news, Fox News Channel.
This is a Fox News alert. You are looking live at the 9/11 Commission hearings. The man you see on your screen is Richard Clarke, a very controversial man indeed today. He is just beginning to testify. He is the former chief of counterterrorism at the White House, resigned from the Bush administration. Let's listen in.
Better understand why the tragedy of 9/11 happened and what we must do to prevent a reoccurrence. I also welcome the hearings because it is finally a forum where I can apologize to the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, to them who are here in the room, to those who are watching on television. Your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you. And I failed you. We tried hard, but that doesn't matter because we failed. And for that failure, I would ask, once all the facts are out, for your understanding and for your forgiveness. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll be glad to take your questions.
Okay, the questioning will be led by Senator Gorton. Are you leading off, or Commissioner Roma?
2 minutes.
Commissioner Roma.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Clarke. I want to thank you as I start my questions for your 30 years of public service to the American people. I want to thank you for your sworn testimony before the 9/11 Commission, over 15 hours. And I really want to say, Mr. Clarke, that there are a lot of distractions out there today. There are books, a lot of news media, a lot of accusations flying back and forth. I want you to concentrate, to the degree you can, on the memos, on the email, on the strategy papers, and on the time that we're tasked with looking at on this 9/11 Commission between 1998 and September the 11th. You coordinated counterterrorism policy in both the Clinton and the Bush administrations. I want to know, first of all, was fighting al-Qaeda a top priority for the Clinton administration from 1998 to the year 2001? How high of priority was it in that Clinton administration during that time period?
My impression was that fighting terrorism in general and fighting al-Qaeda in particular were an extraordinarily high priority in the Clinton administration, certainly no higher priority. There were priorities probably of equal importance, such as the Middle East peace process, but I certainly don't know of one that was any higher in the priority of that administration.
With respect to the Bush administration, from the time they took office until September 11th, 2001, you had much to deal with: Russia, China, G8, the Middle East. How high of priority was fighting al-Qaeda in the Bush administration?
I believe the Bush administration in the first 8 months considered terrorism an important issue, but not an urgent issue. President Bush himself says as much in his interview with Bob Woodward in the book Bush at War. He said, "I didn't feel a sense of urgency." George Tenet and I tried very hard to create a sense of urgency by seeing to it that intelligence reports on the al-Qaeda threat were frequently given to the president and other high-level officials. And there was a process underway to address al-Qaeda. But although I continued to say it was an urgent problem, I don't think it was ever treated that way.
Now, you have said in many ways you've issued some blistering attacks on the Bush administration, but you have not held those criticisms from the Clinton administration either. We heard from Mr. Berger earlier that you were critical of the Clinton administration on two areas: not providing aid to the Northern Alliance and not going after the human conveyor belts of jihadists coming out of the sanctuaries in Afghanistan. Are there more in the Clinton administration years? The USS Cole, the response there?
Well, I think, first of all, Mr. Berger is right to say that almost everything I ever asked for in the way of support from him or from President Clinton, I got. We did enormously increase the counterterrorism budget of the federal government, initiated many programs, including what is now called Homeland Security. Mr. Berger's also right to note that I wanted a covert action program to aid Afghan factions to fight the Taliban, and that was not accomplished. He's also right to note that on several occasions, including after the attack on the Cole, I suggested that we bomb all of the Taliban and al-Qaeda infrastructure. Whether or not it would succeed in killing bin Laden, I thought that was the wrong way of looking at the problem. I think the answer is essentially Mr. Berger got it right.
Okay. Let's move into, with my 15 minutes, let's move into the Bush administration. On January the 25th, we've seen a memo that you've written to Dr. Rice urgently asking for a principles review of al-Qaeda. You include helping the Northern Alliance, covert aid, significant new O2 budget authority to help fight al-Qaeda, and a response to the USS Cole. You attached to this document both the Linda Plan of 1998 and a strategy paper from December 2000. Do you get a response to this urgent request for a principals meeting on these, and how does this affect your time frame for dealing with these important issues?
I did get a response. The response was that in the Bush administration, I should, and my committee, the Counterterrorism Security Group, should report to the Deputies Committee, which is a sub-cabinet level committee, and not to the principals. And that therefore it was inappropriate for me to be asking for a principals meeting. Instead, there would be a deputies meeting.
So does this slow the process down to go to the deputies rather than to the principals or a small group as you previously had done?
It slowed it down enormously by months. First of all, the Deputies Committee didn't meet urgently in January or February. Then when the Deputies Committee did meet, it took the issue of al-Qaeda as part of a cluster of policy issues, including nuclear proliferation in South Asia, democratization in Pakistan, how to treat the problems, the various problems, including narcotics and other problems in Afghanistan, and launched on a series of deputies meetings extending over several months to address al-Qaeda in the context of all of those interrelated issues. That process probably ended, I think, in July of 2001. So we were ready for a principals meeting in July, but the principals' calendar was full, and then they went on vacation, many of them in August, so we couldn't meet in August, and therefore the principals met in September.
So as the Bush administration is carefully considering, from bottom up, a full review of fighting terrorism, what happens to these individual items, like a response to the USS Cole,
well,
flying the Predator? Why aren't these decided in a shorter time frame, as they're also going through a larger policy review of how this policy affects Pakistan and other countries? Important considerations, but why can't you do both?
The Deputies Committee, its chairman, Mr. Hadley, and others, thought that all of these issues were sufficiently interrelated that they should be taken up as a set of issues, and pieces of them should not be broken off.
Did you agree with that?
No, I didn't agree with much of that.
Were you frustrated by this process?
I was sufficiently frustrated that I asked to be reassigned.
When was this?
Probably May or June, certainly no later than June. And there was agreement in that time frame, in the May or June time frame, that I would be, my request would be honored, and I would be reassigned on the 1st of October to a new position to deal with cybersecurity, a position that I requested be created.
So you're saying that the frustration got to a high enough level that it wasn't your portfolio, it wasn't doing a lot of things at the same time, it was that you weren't getting fast enough action on what you were requesting?
That's right. My view was that this administration, while it listened to me, didn't either believe me that there was an urgent problem or was unprepared to act as though there were an urgent problem. And I thought, if the administration doesn't believe its national coordinator for counterterrorism when he says there's an urgent problem, and if it's unprepared to act as though there's an urgent problem, then probably I should get another job. I thought cybersecurity was, and I still think cybersecurity is an extraordinarily important issue for which this country is very underprepared. And I thought perhaps I could make a contribution if I worked full-time on that issue.
You then write a letter or a memo on September the 4th to Dr. Rice expressing some of these frustrations. Several months later, if you say the time frame is May or June, when you decided to resign, a memo comes out that we have seen on September the 4th. You are blunt and blasting DOD for not willingly using the force and the power. You blast the CIA for blocking Predator. You urge policymakers to imagine a day after hundreds of Americans lay dead in a home or abroad after a terrorist attack and ask themselves what else they could have done. You write this on September the 4th, 7 days before September 11th.
That's right.
What else could have been done, Mr. Clarke?
Well, all of the things that we recommended in the plan or strategy, there's a lot of debate about whether it's a plan or a strategy or a series of options, but all of the things we recommended back in January were those things on the table in September. They were done. They were done after September 11th. They were all done. I didn't really understand why they couldn't have been done in February.
Well, let's say, Mr. Clarke, I think this is a fair question. Let's say that you asked to brief the President of the United States on counterterrorism. Mm-hmm. Did you ask that?
I asked for a series of briefings on the issues in my portfolio, including counterterrorism and cybersecurity.
Did you get that request?
I did. I was given a briefing opportunity to brief on cybersecurity in June. I was told I could brief the President on terrorism after this policy development process was complete and we had the principals meeting and a draft national security policy decision that had been approved by the Deputies Committee.
Let's say, Mr. Clarke, as gifted as you might be in eloquence and silver-tongued as anyone could be, and let's imagine that instead of saying no, you asked for this briefing to the President. You said you didn't get it after 8 months of talking. Let's say you get this briefing in February after your memo to Dr. Rice on September the 25th. Mm-hmm. And you meet with the President of the United States in February and you brief him on terrorism. Tell me how you convince the President to move forward on this and get this principals meeting that doesn't take place until September the 4th moved up so that you can do something about this problem.
Well, I think the best thing to have done, if there had been a meeting with the President in February, was to show him the accumulated intelligence that al-Qaeda was strong and was planning attacks against the United States, against friendly governments. It was possible to make a very persuasive case that this was a major threat and this was an urgent problem.
And you think this would have sped up the deputies process and the principals process? Well, do you think the President would have reached down then and said something to the national security team to
I don't know.
Expedite this? Well, you worked for President Clinton. You saw what meetings with presidents could do there. Is this a magical solution, or is it something that presidents might say right back to you, listen, Dick, I've got many other things I've got to do here in the Middle East peace process, Bosnia, Kosovo, the Korean Peninsula. How likely is it that we are able to see some kind of result from a meeting like that?
I think it depends in part on the President. President Bush was regularly told by the Director of Central Intelligence that there was an urgent threat. On one occasion, he was told this dozens of times in the morning briefings that George Tenet gave him. On one of those occasions, he asked for a strategy and to deal with the threat. Condi Rice came back from that meeting, called me, and relayed what the President had requested. And I said, well, you know, we've had this strategy ready since before you were inaugurated. I showed it to you. You have the paperwork. We can have a meeting on the strategy anytime you want. She said she would look into it. Her looking into it and the President asking for it did not change the pace at which it was considered. And as far as I know, the president never asked again. At least I was never informed that he asked again. I do know he was thereafter continually informed about the threat by George Tenet.
Let me ask you, with my yellow light on, a question about the summer of 2000 alert. You were saying, the CIA was saying, everybody was saying something spectacular is about to happen. Spiking in intelligence, something terrible is about to happen. You've told us in some of our interviews, you only wish you would have known at that time, in that summer, what the FBI knew with regard to Moussaoui, the Phoenix memo, and terrorists in the United States. What could you have done with some of that information, with these spiked alerts, with the spectacular attack on the horizon in the summer of 2001?
Well, Congressman, it is very easy in retrospect to say that I would have done this or I would have done that. And we'll never know. I would like to think that had I been informed by the FBI that 2 senior al-Qaeda operatives who had been in a planning meeting earlier in Kuala Lumpur were now in the United States, and we knew that, and we knew their names, and I think we even had their pictures, I would like to think that I would have released, or would have had the FBI release a press release with their names, with their descriptions, held a press conference, tried to get their names and pictures on the front page of every paper, America's Most Wanted, the Evening News, and caused a successful nationwide manhunt for those two of the 19 hijackers. But I don't know, because you're asking me a hypothetical, and I have the benefit now of 20/20 hindsight.
Thank you, Mr. Clarke. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the patience and the time.
Okay, thank you, sir. Senator Gorton?
Mr. Clarke, you got the position as the head of this counterterrorism and security group, CSG, when in about May of 1998, is that correct?
No, Senator, actually, I got it in the first Bush administration in the fall of 1992.
But it got the level of being up there at the White House and being a very important position in 1998?
What happened in 1998, let me go back. The Counterterrorism Security Group, the CSG, goes back to the Reagan administration. It's been around for that long. I started chairing it during the last few months of the Bush administration in 1992. Continued to chair it throughout the Clinton administration and into the second Bush administration. In 1998, President Clinton signed a presidential directive that created a new title for the chairman of that group. The chairman had always been a special assistant to the president. That was the title. Under the new directive in 1998, the title became National Coordinator for Counterterrorism. But I think there's something I need to say about that title. The actual title was National Coordinator for Security, Infrastructure Protection, and Counterterrorism. And the press, thinking that title was too long and not sexy enough, immediately turned it into Terrorism Czar. If you look at the Presidential Decision Directive in 1998 that created this position, it is replete with what the National Coordinator cannot do and what resources the National Coordinator would not have. It was not a counterterrorism czar, especially when compared to people like the drug czar. It
was a staff position, not an action, not an action position, in other words.
It gave me all of the responsibility and none of the authority.
And later in 1998, of course, we had the explosions, the attack on the 2 embassies.
Right.
And shortly after that, the administration took its one military response to terrorism in the attacks on Afghanistan and the Sudan. Were those actions taken on your recommendation? Were you a part of the decision-making process and calling for that reaction?
Senator, I was, but if I may be a little picky, this was not the administration's first or only use of military action in response to terrorism. The administration began in the first 5 months, the Clinton administration, first 5 months of the administration, 6 months, to use military force in response to terrorism.
The first to Al-Qaeda.
First time that we had an Al-Qaeda attack on the United States facilities. It was the first time that Al-Qaeda had attacked us, and we had been told it was Al-Qaeda. In retrospect, many years after these attacks occurred, FBI and CIA began to say that things like the World Trade Center attack in 1993 might have been done by an early stage Al-Qaeda.
In August of 1998, did you recommend a longer lasting military response, or just precisely the one that in fact took place?
I recommended a series of rolling attacks against the infrastructure in Afghanistan. Every time they would rebuild it, I proposed that we blow it up again. Much like, in fact, we were doing in Iraq, where we had a rolling series of attacks on their air defense system.
And shortly after that, you came up with the so-called Delenda plan, as I understand it. And is our staff report accurate in saying that it had 4 principal approaches: diplomacy, covert action, various financial members, and military action? Is that a reasonable summary?
Yes, sir.
Our staff has given us?
Yes, sir.
And is our staff accurate in saying that the strategy was never formally adopted, but that you were authorized in effect to go ahead with the first 3, but not with the 4th?
Yes, sir.
And at various times thereafter, you did recommend specific military responses under specific circumstances, did you not?
Yes, sir.
Each of which was rejected for one reason or another.
That's correct.
Then in the early winter of 1999, when the CIA came up with a plan to attack a hunting camp in Afghanistan, at which it felt that Osama bin Laden was present or was not present, that recommendation or that plan was ultimately aborted. Did you recommend against that plan?
Yes, Senator. What I did was to call the Director of Central Intelligence and say that I had finally been presented with satellite photography of the facility. And it was very clear to me that this looked like something other than a terrorist camp. It looked like a luxury hunting trip. And I asked him to look into it personally. When he did, he called back and he said that he was no longer recommending the attack.
Okay. So you never recommended either for or against an attack on that camp?
Well, I think, I don't want to split hairs. By calling the Director of Central Intelligence and suggesting to him that this did not look to me like a terrorist facility and urging him to look into it, he certainly had the impression that I wasn't in favor of it. Absolutely.
Well, did it make any difference as to what kind of camp it was, if it was likely that Osama bin Laden was there?
Well, it did, and in 2 respects. The administration had adopted a policy with regard, let me back up. After the bombings in 1998, we kept submarines off the coast of Pakistan, loaded with cruise missiles, for the purpose of launching a follow-on attack when we could locate bin Laden. The intelligence that we got about where bin Laden was very poor. The DCI, Mr. Tennant, characterized that intelligence himself on repeated occasions as very poor. On one occasion, we thought we knew where he was, and there were 2 problems. 1, the intelligence was poor, according to George Tennant, and 2, the collateral damage would have been great, according to the Pentagon. When I looked at this facility, it looked to me like the intelligence was again poor, because it didn't look like a terrorist camp, and the probability of collateral damage would have been high, I thought, since I believed, based on the satellite photography, that people other than terrorists were there. The decision ultimately was George Tennant's, and George Tennant recommended no action be taken. I don't know in retrospect, your staff might, but I don't know in retrospect whether it proved to be true that bin Laden was in the vicinity or not.
In any event, every recommendation for military action or covert action from late 1998 until the year 2000